Zulu's warriors declined to fire the firearms. The arms, they said, made them cowards. The conflict between the Transvaal and Cetshwayo over the Boer continued unabated. Cetshwayo considered Sir Shepstone his friend and counted on his support during this dispute, but in 1877 that friendship was tested when Cetshwayo took a small force into Transvaal and persuaded the Boers to give up their independence. Shepstone, as the new administrator of Transvaal, then saw the border dispute from the other side. He claimed to have evidence that supported the position of the Boers, but said evidence never surfaced. He attempted to placate the Zulus at the meeting at Blood River in October 1877, but his speeches and promises did not win over the Zulus, who accused him of betraying them. At this point, Shepstone's report back to Carnarvon shifted in tone, painting the Zulus as a threat, an aggressive people challenging the border, instead of the unfavourable opinion he previously expressed. In February 1878, a special commission on the boundary question was formed by Henry Bartle, Lieutenant Governor of Natal. They ended up finding entirely in favour of the Zulus, but this was unacceptable to Henry Bartle Frere, who was still pushing for his federation plan. He characterised the award as, quote, one-sided and unfair to the Boers, end quote, and stated that the Boers living in the land should either be compensated for leaving or protected while staying. Frere had an alternative motive for the meeting on the Boundary Commission report. He planned to use it to deliver an ultimatum to the Zulus, an ultimatum which would allow the British forces under Lord Chelmsford to actively invade Zululand, rather than just stand in defence of a Zulu invasion. The ultimatum centred on 3 incidents which occurred in late July, August and September. These would be Frere's sensed causes belli. Frere knew that no way the king could respond to the ultimatum, giving him the excuse he needed to attack. The first 2 incidents both related to the 2 wives of Shaka Conga fleeing into Natal and the subsequent capture and execution of them. They were described as follows, quote, a wife of the chief Shaya had left and escaped into Natal. She followed on the 28th of July 78 by a party of Zulus under Mecca Zulu, the chief son of Shayawe, and his brother seized at the kraal. She had taken refuge and carried back to Zululand, where she was put to death in accordance with Zulu law. A week later, the same young men, with 2 other brothers and an uncle, captured in like manner another refugee wife of Shia in company of the young man who she had fled. The woman was carried back and is supposed to have been put to death likewise. The young man with her, although guilty in Zulu eyes of a most heinous crime punishable with death, was safe from them on English soil. They did not touch him. End quote. The 3rd incident in September involved 2 men detained on a sandbank of the Tugela River near the Middle Drift. Sir Bartle Frere described the incident to the Secretary of State for the Colonies at that time, Sir Michael Hicks Beach. Quote, Mr. Smith, a surveyor of Colonial Engineer Department, was on duty inspecting a road down the Tugela near Fort Buckingham, which had been made a few years ago. Order of Sir Garnet Wolseley and accompanied by Mr. Dayton, a trader resident of Fort Buckingham, went down to the ford across the Tugela. The stream was very low and ran under the Zulu bank, but they were on the side of it and had not crossed when they were surrounded by a body of 15 to 20 armed Zulus, made prisoner and then taken off their horses. On the Natal side of the river and roughly treated and threatened for some time, though ultimately at the insistence of the head man who came up, they were released and allowed to depart. End quote. These incidents taken in isolation were not enough to justify a full invasion of Zululand. Bulwell viewed these incidents as non-political and did not hold Cetshwayo personally responsible. Quote, I have sent a message to the Zulu King to inform him of this act of violence and outrage by his subjects in the Natal territory, and to request him to deliver up to this government to be tried for their offences under the laws of the colony, the persons of Mxulula and Bekazula, the two sons of Cetshwayo, who were the leaders of the party. End quote. Cetshwayo's response also treated the issue rather lightly. Quote, Cetshwayo is sorry to acknowledge that the message brought by Umlugu is true, but he begs His Excellency will not take it in the light he sees the Natal government who seem as what Cetshwayo's sons did not. He can only attribute to a rash act of boys who in the zeal of their father's house did not think of what they were doing. Cetshwayo acknowledges that they deserve punishing, and he sends some of his Nduzuna who will follow Unamungi with these words. Cetshwayo states that no act of his subjects will make his quarrel with his fathers of the sons of Shaka. End quote. The Lieutenant Governor's initial complaint was put in form of a request for Cetshwayo to surrender the culprits involved. However, Sir Bartle Frere upped the ante, transforming into demand. He wrote to Hicks Beach on the 30th of September 1878 saying, quote, apart from whatever may be the general wish of the Zulu Nation, it seems to me that the seizure of these two refugee women in British territory by an armed force crossing an unmistakable and well-known boundary line and carrying them off and merging them with contemporaneous disregard for the remonstrations of the Natal policemen, itself an insult and violation of British territory which cannot be passed over unless apologised in a tone before compliance with the Lieutenant Governor's demands that the leaders of the murderous gangs shall be given up to Dutch justice, it is necessary to send to the Zulu King an ultimatum which put an end to the pacific relations with our neighbours. End quote. Hicks Beach replied at least 3 times on the 17th of October, 21st of October and 18th of December, explicitly stating there was no invasion of Zululand. War was to be avoided. In their 21st November dispatch they stated, quote, Her Majesty's Government has arrived. It is her duty to impress upon you that in supplying these reinforcements it is desired of Her Majesty's Government not to furnish means for a campaign of invasion and conquest, but to afford such protection as may be necessary at this conjunction to the lives and property of the colonists. Though the present aspect of the affairs is menacing in a high degree, I can by no means arrive at the conclusion that war with the Zulus would be unavoidable, and am confident you, in concert with Sir H. Bulwer, will use every effort to overcome the existing difficulties by judgment and forbearance, and to avoid an evil such as a deprecated new Zulu War. End quote. Bartle Frere and Sir Henry Ernest Gascoigne Bulwer had several discussions and eventually decided to set a meeting with Zulu representatives. The meeting was supposed to be the occasion on which the findings of the Boundary Commission could be expressed to the Zulu people. However, they also used it to present the King an ultimatum. By this time, they were able to include further incidents into their justification. It was no longer merely the case of Cetshwayo's sons or Smith and Dayton. Cetshwayo had apparently broken several promises to Shepstone at his coronation in 1872. In fact, that ceremony had run only to satisfy Shepstone and it was in no way binding, and Cetshwayo had actually become king several weeks earlier simply by his application by his Isandlwana. The ultimatum also included surrender of Mbeleni Mtshwayo, the son of Swazi king, who was unsuccessful in uprising in his brother's claim to the throne. Exile, he took refuge in western Zululand near Ntumbi River with permission from Cetshwayo, who possibly regarded him as a buffer zone between him and the Boers of the Transvaal. Mbele made raids on anyone in that area for their cattle and prisoners, no matter if they were Boer or Zulu. Thus, Britain had to deal with him once they took over administration of Transvaal. Frere thought that the Zulu king was paying Mbele to cause problems and thus demanded his surrender as well. Sir Henry Bartle wrote, quote, "The king disowned Mbele's act by saying that Mbele had been given in trouble, that he'd been left the Zulu country in order to wrest the Zwazi chieftainship from his brother, the reigning chief, and that it was returned to him should kill him. But there's nothing to show that it is any way punished him, or on the contrary, it's quite certain that even if Mbele did not act with the express orders of Cetshwayo, he did so with the knowledge that he would be agreeable to the king." End quote. It took a long time for information to get to South Africa and London and back again, and it took advantage of it. Intentions from London or holding back vital information until it was too late for London to act in other ways. There was no mention to the British government of the demands until a letter written on the 14th of October 1878 finally arrived on the 16th of November, and by then messages had already been dispatched and the entire process begun. A telegraph sent off the moment they received the letter may have prevented the ultimatum, but there was nothing to indicate the urgency of the situation. Nowhere in the letter was anything suggesting how soon Frere would act or how stringent his demands would be. In January 1879, Hicks Beach wrote to Bartle Frere, quote, "I may observe that the communications which had previously been received from you had not entirely prepared them for the course which you deem necessary to take. The representations made by Lord Chelmsford and yourself last autumn at the urgent need of strengthening Her Majesty's forces in South Africa was based upon the imminent danger of an invasion of Natal by the Zulus and the inadequate means at the time of your disposal for meeting it. In order to afford protection to the lives and properties of the colonialists, the reinforcements asked for were supplied, and in informing your decision of Her Majesty's government, I take the opportunity to impress upon you the importance of using every effort to avoid war. By the terms which you have dictated to the Zulu King, however, necessary to relieve the colony in future from impending increasing danger are evident, such as may not improbably refuse even at the risk of war, and I regret necessity for immediate action should it be prepared to you in imperative as a prelude from incurring delay which been involved in consultating Her Majesty's government upon a subject of such importance as the terms which Cetshwayo should be required to accept before the terms are actually presented to the Zulu King." End quote. I had on previous occasion complained it was helpless to impact Frere's actions. This was a note that he gave to the Prime Minister, quote, "I have impressed this view upon Sir B. Frere both officially and privately to the best of my power. I cannot really control him without telegraph, as I feel as likely as not that he is at war with the Zulus at present moment." End quote. It seemed Frere was determined to start a conflict with the Zulus, and he succeeded. Cetshwayo did not respond to the demands, on the 11th of January 1879, Bartle Frere declared that they were in a state of war. The British forces there to defend Natal had already been deployed, and on that day they crossed the border and invaded Zululand. The ultimatum was delivered to King Cetshwayo on the 11th of December 1878. There were 13 different items listed with varying time limits. The first 3 items had a deadline of the 31st of December, with an extra 10 days added on for the remaining items on the agenda. All these deadlines were later expanded until the 10th of January, and when they were not accomplished, Bartle Frere declared war. The items on the ultimatum were as follows: surrender Shearer's 3 sons and brother to be tried by the Natal courts. payment of a fine of 500 head of cattle for the outrages committed by the above, and for Cetshwayo's delay in complying with the request